The following is a presentation of Chandler Christian Church in Chandler, Arizona. For more information, please go to chandlercc.org.
Well, last year we celebrated the ABCs of financial freedom, and we enjoyed having Barry Cameron come to speak as a part, the author of that book. And so this year we're enjoying Contagious Generosity. How many of you have enjoyed our study through Contagious Generosity? It's been powerful. And Barry is obviously the author of that book too. And so we invited him to come back and speak. Barry and I go way back. We were in college together years ago, and we enjoyed that. And, you know, amazing though, he looks so much better than I do, so that's great. I'm glad for him, really. So Barry is a good friend. We've known each other through the years and traced our ministry. And, he said last year, he said, amazing what God has done with a couple of guys from Williamson, second floor, And it is amazing what God can do if you just give yourself to him. And God has used Barry in a mighty, mighty way. He's traveled across the country, really, sharing this message of how God wants to bless us and how he wants us to be generous in that blessing. And I know that you've been blessed by the reading. I know you've been blessed by his ministries he's shared with us. And so it would be my honor for you to give Barry a very warm Chandler Christian Church welcome as he comes to share with us now.
I was here last year, and I spoke last night for the Saturday night service, and one lady said, so are you coming back next year? I said, well, I'd have to write a third book. I don't know that I could do that, but it is so good to be back here. And I tell you, the honoring the veterans. Wow, to all you veterans, you just need to know, I owe you, and my family owes you for everything we have. I've told people you cut me open and I bleed red, white, and blue. I love this country. I'm not one of those people that, there's a lot of things that we need to fix, but we can fix them. And if we follow God's word. But I love our country, and I love our veterans. And, I was on a plane flight several years ago. In fact, it was 2006. I'd gone to the North American Christian Convention, and we were getting on this plane, my wife and I and my executive pastor and his wife. And a unique phenomenon happens when I walk on a plane. It happens every single time. Now, maybe it's just me, and maybe you don't feel this way, but how many of you have flown on a commercial airline? Okay, most of us? Okay. I'm always surprised. People say, I've never flown. But when I walk on a plane, there's this unique phenomenon. When I come through the door and I walk to that little section up front called first class, I always think, how come I'm not sitting up here? That may just be me. It may just be me. But anyway, we got on this plane that day, and as we walked through first class, I noticed 3 preachers in first class that I knew. Now, really, I wasn't envious. Because I was with my friends and all that, and so we said hi to them, and we walked back, and we walked about 2 rows back behind the bulkhead. We were right there by first class, and I was sitting on the aisle, and my wife, and then my executive pastor Mill and his wife Vicky, we were sitting there, and I'd noticed several soldiers get on the plane, but nothing out of the ordinary. And when they shut the door on the plane, the pilot came on the intercom. And he said, ladies and gentlemen, we're honored to have some of the greatest fighting forces in the world on our airplane today. And I'd like for you to thank our servicemen and servicewomen who are flying with us today. And I mean, the plane just erupted into applause. And it was cool. This was one of those neat moments where you're going, yeah, that's right. Well, that no sooner happened, and a man and a woman walked back from first class, and I thought, well, they've already shut the door on the plane. Our plane is backing away from the gate. And there's a man and a woman, they walk out, and there were a couple of soldiers sitting on the other aisle, and this couple said to them, we'd like for you to go take our seats in first class. We want to say thanks to you. And the soldiers said, no, really, we're fine. They said, no, we insist. You please go take our seats. And the flight attendants didn't know what was going on. They were wanting everybody to be seated, and the plane's moving and all that. Well, the soldiers got their duffel bags, and they went up to first class, and I tapped my friends on the shoulder. I go, did you see that? They go, yeah. About that time, another couple came out of first class. There were 2 soldiers behind them. They said, listen, we'd like to give you our seats to first class. We'd like to thank you for what you're doing for our country. They go, really? No, we're fine. We don't need to go in. I mean, they were insistent, and now the plane has stopped. And they get their duffel bags down, and they go up to first class. I mean, now, people are wiping tears away. I mean, this is unbelievable. And I tapped my friends on the shoulder. I said, I want to tell you 2 things. I said, number 1, if I ever get upgraded and there's a soldier on my flight, Janice, you and I are going to do that. And then I said, number 2, Shouldn't the preachers have been the ones who came back and did that? It's a true story. True story. If you have your Bibles, turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 16. I want to be there in just a moment. We're just going to look at four quick verses that talk about giving and generosity. But I want to be very clear up front. Generosity is in your DNA. Whether we've ever met or whether you're a member of this church or not, every person in this building, you need to know that generosity is in your DNA. So how do you know that? Genesis 1:26, God said, let us make man in our image. You're made in the image of God, so generosity is in your DNA. Listen, even people outside this church who don't go to church or hate God or whatever, generosity is in their DNA. And that's why when you hear stories like I just told you, which is an absolutely true story, something inside of you goes, wow, that's right. That's the way it should be. You know what that is? That's because it's in your DNA. That's who you were created to be generous. You say, okay, Pastor, I got a question for you. If generosity is in everyone's DNA, how come so many people in our world are selfish? Good question. I know the answer to that one too. I think it happens when we're born. Now, I don't remember it, but I've been told that when I was born, it was all about me. And, the doctor, I had my own personal doctor, and I had my own personal nurses. And in fact, I had my own little personal, whatever you call those things they put babies in, and had a light and blankets and whatever I needed. And if I wanted to eat, I got to eat. And if I wanted to go to the bathroom, I went to the bathroom. And my mom and dad were fawning over me and all the relatives and people from the church. And it was all about me. And if I didn't get what I wanted, all I had to do was cry. And for 2 years, I got away with that act. And so did you. And I think the rest of our life is undoing those first 24 months. When we mistakenly think it's all about us. Generosity is in our DNA, and if we learn to be generous, God will do incredible things in our lives. Why? Because we're becoming like Him. There's a great verse in Proverbs chapter 11, verses 24 and 25, says, one man gives freely yet gains even more. Another withholds unduly but comes to poverty. A generous man will prosper. He who refreshes others will himself be refreshed. What that means is this, that if we learn to be generous, we'll always have more than enough. But if we hang on to everything we have and we're not generous, we won't even be able to hang on to what we have. Now in 1 Corinthians chapter 16, the Apostle Paul makes an incredible statement. Notice in verse 1. He says, now about the collection. That's an interesting statement. The word collection in the Greek is an interesting word. It means to say something. To say something. The collection, the offering, says something. Did you know that? There'll be an offering later here this morning, and it says something about this church. In fact, when I first heard the story last night about the Dollar Club, what a great idea. What a great idea. And to be able to help needy families, and the family that Roger just told you about that you were able to help last week, to see that says something about this church. The collection says something about this church. You need to also know that the collection says something about you and I too. What we give or don't give. And Paul says now about the collection. Now he does two things in these 4 verses. He tells us the purpose of generosity. He tells us the practice of generosity. Notice the purpose of generosity, verse 1. Now about the collection for God's people, do what I told the Galatian churches to do. Now you say, well, what did he tell the Galatians to do? He told them to give and be generous, and he'll tell us here exactly what he told them. But you got to remember, in 1 Corinthians, the whole epistle, Paul is answering questions. The Corinthians, they were a messed up church. Did you know there are messed up churches? You know why? Because there's some messed up pastors and some messed up people. And so Paul writes this letter to this messed up church to try to help them get on the right track. And they did eventually get on the right track. But he's answering a series of questions. For instance, in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 1, he says, now about the matters you wrote. And he goes on and he talks about marriage, and he talks about divorce, and he talks about single people, and he talks about remarriage. Chapter 8, verse 1, he says, now about food sacrificed to idols. And I know most of you are going to say, Pastor, I don't care about food sacrificed to idols. I don't either. But in their day, they did. The question they were asking was, what about those gray areas where there's not a thus saith the Lord? What about those issues in life where the Bible doesn't say you can do it or you can't do it? I mean, how do you handle that? For us today, it'd be issues like social drinking or smoking a cigar or buying a lottery ticket. Now you understand. In chapter 12, he says, now about spiritual gifts. They'd ask him about spiritual gifts. And now in chapter 16, he says, now about the collection. He's answering their questions. They obviously knew about this offering, and they'd ask him about it. And so he's telling them the purpose. Well, notice in verse 3, he tells us the purpose of this offering was for the saints in Jerusalem. He goes, I want to send some men you approve and send them with your gift, that's the offering, the collection, to go to Jerusalem. Now, if you've known the Bible at all, you know that Jerusalem is where the church started. That was the first church, day of Pentecost. 3,000 people were baptized that day. They had a church of 3,120 on first day of opening. What an incredible church. But now the church has fallen on hard times, and they need financial assistance. You say, well, why? 2 reasons. Number 1 was a series of famines. They'd gone without rain. They couldn't grow crops. They'd had all kinds of bad things happen. I can identify with that a little bit because in Texas, we're in a drought right now, a horrible drought. Most of our lakes in the state are at least 25% below where they should be at this time of the year. In fact, we have lakes in our area that have completely disappeared. There's one lake in Arlington called Lake Arlington where they built all these really expensive homes and put these docks out there for their boats, and now it's a mud hole. It's horrible. On our property, we have a 146-acre campus, and there are cracks in the ground so big you can put your foot down in them. Now, you don't dare because you don't know where the bottom is. It's pretty bad. We're on watering restrictions right now. I didn't know they could restrict you for the number of showers you could take in a week. So a series of famines, that's pretty bad. But the second reason why they were in trouble was a serious failure. Jesus has said to them in Acts chapter 1, verse 8, you shall be my witnesses in Jerusalem, in Judea, in Samaria, and to the uttermost parts of the earth. Remember that, Acts chapter 1, verse 8? You read the book of Acts, you'll realize for the most part they didn't do that. Jesus told them to do it, and they decided, you know what, we're not going to do that. Now, I know that no one in Arizona would ever do that. But you need to know we have a couple of folks in Texas who would try that. But it's not smart. Friend, listen, you and I cannot say, well, I know that's what God says, but I'm not going to do it and get away with it. You can't do it. You say, well, how do you know that? Well, in Acts chapter 8, verse 1, Acts 1:8, you shall be my witnesses in Judea, Samaria, the uttermost parts of the earth. Acts chapter 8, verse 1 says, a great persecution broke out against the church. You read it, Acts chapter 8, verse 1. And the believers were scattered. Guess where they were scattered to? Judea, Samaria, and the uttermost parts of the earth. They just thought they weren't going to do what Jesus said to do. And he allowed circumstances, he allowed persecution to get them to do what he had told them to do up front. They'd been so much better off if they just did what God said. So they needed this offering, and so Paul was encouraging churches to give generously to help them. Now, I know some people say, well, now, Pastor, you know, I hear pastor after pastor and church after church talk about, I need to give, I need to give, I need to give. Well, what about other people giving to me? When do people give to me? Well, God gives to you. Jesus said, if you even give a cup of cold water to someone in my name, I say that, you'll be rewarded for that. Now, if you do it to be rewarded, there's no reward. But if you do it because you're really trying to extend the gospel or the love of Christ, you'll be rewarded. But here's the point. You're not going to outgive God. God is a debtor to no man. And the more we give, like I read from Proverbs, the more we'll have. In fact, there's a great verse in 2 Corinthians 9, verse 11. It says, you'll be made rich in every way so you can be generous on every occasion. You want a 911? There it is. You'll be made rich in every way so you can be generous on every occasion. You're not going to outgive God. God will give back to us. You give, God will give back to us. Did you hear about the fella that bought a new boomerang and he killed himself trying to throw the old one away? You're not going to outgive God. It's just not going to happen. You give, God will give you. My dad used to say, you know, you shovel to God, God's got a bigger shovel. You're just not going to outgive him. We need to learn that we were created to be generous, and when we are generous and when we give, something inside of us goes, yes. And then God gives us more. Which leads me to the second thing. Not only the purpose of generosity, it's to meet needs, but the practice of generosity. How are we supposed to do it? Now, this is where the Bible gets very practical. Because Paul specifically says, here's how you're supposed to give. If you came this morning and you walked in and you said to one of the ushers, come in, I would really like to know how I'm supposed to give. I sure hope I can learn that. Here, we're going to answer your question right here, all right? Here it is. Number one, our giving should be punctual. Look at verse 2. He says, on the first day of every week. When are we supposed to give? On the first day of every week. Jews gather on the Sabbath. We worship on the first day of the week. And giving is to be a part of our worship. It's to be a punctual part of our worship. It's to be a planned part of our worship, a prepared part of our worship. Sometimes people say, well, I just don't give. How silly would it be if someone came to church this morning and when Pastor Roger said, let's all pray, and someone in the back goes, no, I'm sorry, I can't do that. Excuse me? Oh, I don't pray as a part of my worship. I just don't do that. Or what about when the worship leader came out to lead worship and someone in the back said, no, I won't be singing today. Excuse me? Oh, I don't sing as a part of my worship. We'd all think those people are nuts, right? Then why is it when the offering bag gets passed, people go, they hand it to the next person, they don't give, and we don't go, whoa, time out. What? You're not giving? That should be a part of our worship. It's to be a part of our worship. A punctual part of our worship. On the first day of every week, we are to give punctually, purposefully. Now, by the way, you can give without loving, but you cannot love without giving. When someone falls in love, it starts costing money. It's true. Years ago in high school, I fell in love with a girl in high school, and I wanted to buy her a pink sweater. I think it was $12 back then. And my dad said, son, that's too much money to be spending right now. And I go, why? And he goes, because that's not going to be your last girlfriend. I go, yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. I'm going to marry her someday. He goes, no, you're not. And I went to college and forgot about her and met somebody else. I didn't want to get the money back. But, love gives. And listen, you can't give yourself fully to the work of the Lord if you're not fully giving to the work of the Lord. Number two, our giving should be not only punctual, it should be personal. He says on the first day of every week, each one of you should set aside a sum of money. Every one of us is supposed to give. Not just our parents, not just the little kids. No, everyone's supposed to give. The rich are to give. The poor are to give. The young are to give. The old are to give. The tall people are to give. The short people are to give. All of us are to give. All of us. The widow's mite is recognized by God just as much as the wealth of Barnabas. It's not the amount. It's not the money. But all of us are to give. And listen, one of the greatest things we can do is teach our kids. My kids, I grew up in a home where my mom and dad loved the church. We were there Sunday morning, Sunday night. We were there Wednesday night. There was usually some kind of church activity. And I know times have changed and schedules have changed and all that. But we've tried to model to our kids our love for God and our love for the church. And do you realize the only day of the week that it's never hard for us to ever have gotten our kids out of bed was Sunday? Never had a battle getting our kids out of bed on Sunday. Never. But on Monday, we did. Tuesday, we did. Even Saturday, we did. But Sunday, never. You know why? Because we passed on from what I received from my parents to our kids. We passed that on, that we love God and God is first. Listen, our kids need to know we give to God and we're generous to the work of God. They need to know that. They need to see that in us. Now, I have a grandson. I've been a grandfather barely over a year. Greatest experience, one of the greatest experiences of my life. Becoming a Christian is the best. Getting married, second. And having a grandson. In fact, if I'd have known grandkids were this much fun, I'd have had them first, And my little grandson Will, the guy's just changed my life. I can be having a bad day and just get a picture from his mom on my cell phone, changes my day. Or the little guy's come walking toward my office with his little waddle walk and puts his hands up for Grandpa. I just melt. I love this kid. And I get the joy. When I was here last year, I told you the story about how when we got out of debt, I had to bribe my family and tell them that if they'd help us get out of debt, I'd take them on vacation anywhere in the world they wanted to go, and they voted they wanted to go to Disney World. So we went to Disney World. Well, what you may not know this morning, this is the 10th anniversary of our family getting out of debt. In fact, our family got out of debt 10 years ago this week, the 15th November. I'll never forget it. Went and paid the last payment on my house. We were debt-free. And we went to Disney World. 5 years ago, we went to Disney World. December 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th, I'm taking my whole family and my grandson to Disney World. I'm the one that's going to get to introduce him to Mickey Mouse in person. I'm so excited. I can't wait. When the Cardinals were playing the Texas Rangers in the World Series, I got World Series tickets and flew my mom and dad up from Florida because they're Cardinal fans and took my grandson and got a picture with my dad and me and my son and his son, all of us there. What an incredible experience. I got to provide that. But you know, of all those experiences, one of the things I'm really passionate about is I want to pass on generosity to my little grandson. I want that guy to grow up to be so much more generous than I ever thought about being. What a great joy and what a great responsibility to pass on to our kids and to our children's children to be generous and put God first and meet needs. That's what God wants us to do. Our giving should be punctual. Our giving should be personal. Thirdly, our giving should be proportional. Verse 2, watch this. On the first day of every week, each one of you should set aside a sum of money in keeping with his income. Now that's the NIV. Do any of you have the King James Version? Any of you still have that King James Version? I love the King James Version. Most of the verses I memorized out of the King James Version. For God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish but have everlasting life. I mean, I don't use all those words in normal discussion with people, but when I quote John 3:16, brother, it's the King James. I love the King James. And in the King James Version, you know how it translates that verse in keeping with his income? It translates it this way: as God hath prospered him. As God hath prospered him. Now we understand the word prosperity, but if you put the word blessing there, as God has blessed you, you should give in accordance with how God's blessed you. Now listen, I got a deal for you this morning. If God hasn't blessed you at all, then don't give anything. You don't have to. You're off the hook. If he hasn't blessed you at all, you don't have to give. But I got to tell you something. I got to give. I got to give. My wife and I give online, the majority of our giving to our local church, but I give in every service when I'm home. I almost missed the offering last service. It kind of caught me by surprise and I couldn't give. But I want to give here. He said, well, why are you giving here? It's part of my worship. And I've been blessed, and I got to give in accordance with my blessings. In fact, the Bible says we're all supposed to. You know, there's an old song we used to sing, and some of you old timers may remember it. It went like this: count your many blessings, name them one by one. Any of you old timers remember that song? Count your many blessings, name them one by one. The next line's unbelievable. And it will surprise you what the Lord has done. You counted your blessings lately? Made a list of all the things God bless you. It surprised you. Maybe that'd be a good exercise this afternoon. Go home and write down all the blessings you have. And it'll surprise you what the Lord has done. Has God blessed you with health? Has God blessed you with a family? God bless you with a great spouse. Can I tell you something? I was in California this last week with a friend whose wife left him for a high school boyfriend. And I battled all the emotions of anger and all that kind of stuff, and how could she and all that kind of stuff. And you know what I said to him? I said, Gene, I said, I have someone at home that loves me no matter what. No matter what. I get wrinkles. Doesn't matter. Put on a few pounds. Doesn't matter. That's worth something. It's worth a lot. Do you have that? Do you have someone that calls you dad? That's worth something. Mom? That's worth something. Do you have friends who'll be there not when they need something or want something, but they just want you? Isn't that worth something? What about a church? Do you have a clue what you have here at Chandler Christian Church? Roger took me last night, showed me the bridge. Oh my. I couldn't believe that place. Here are all these kids running around, skateboards. Roger tried to get me. He says, I know you want to get on. No, I don't. But and all the stories of these families who can't believe you all do that for free. Just because you love the community? See, Paul says, give in accordance with your blessings. You know what? If every person in this service, forget the other services for a moment, if just the people in this service gave in today's offering in accordance with your blessing, it would be the largest offering in the history of this church. We gave in accordance with our blessing. That's how we're supposed to give. That's pretty practical. And then he says, our giving should be practical. Verse D, he says, so that when I come, no collections will have to be made. Paul says, get the offering out of the way. That's not the main thing. Now, I don't know everything about this church, but I do know this. The offering's not the main thing here. But the offering, the collection, what's given enables you to do the main thing, like building a building like the bridge. Last time I was here, I was blown away by your children's ministry. I just couldn't believe it. What makes that possible? What makes possible helping needy families? What makes possible honoring veterans? What makes all that possible? What's given? Get the collection out of the way, Paul says, so we can get on to the main thing, preaching the gospel, touching people's lives forever. You know, Wayne Smith told a story about a Baptist hospital in Lexington, Kentucky, and he said on the desk where you came in to check in, there was a sign there and it said, we're not here to collect money, but if we don't collect money, we won't be here. And that's true, isn't it? It's not the main thing. And by the way, God hasn't called your church to meet every need in this valley. But you know, you could sure meet a lot more needs if on the first day of every week, each one of you would lay aside a sum of money in keeping with his or her income as God has blessed you and give it to the work of the Lord here. Consistently, enthusiastically, cheerfully. Now in verses 3 and 4, Paul makes it clear giving is not to be taken lightly. He says, when I arrive, I'll give letters of introduction to the men you approve and send them with your gift to Jerusalem. If it seems advisable for me to go also, they will accompany me. What he's talking about there is accountability. Whatever's given, there ought to be accountability. There ought to be checks and balances. And listen, you wouldn't have what you have here at Chandler without the wise leadership that you have here. And the systems and the checks and balances that you have to make sure that they get the most out of every dollar that's given for God's kingdom. You know, I heard of a couple of gentlemen years ago in a church similar to this. And they were standing out in the lobby of their church, and one of the men said to his friend, he said, Jim, you know, I'm just thinking, you know, I'm not really sure that we should be spending all the money we spend on all these buildings. And he said, have you thought about all what the utility bill must be here? I mean, with all the stuff we got and the printed materials, the four-color stuff, the brochures and all that. I mean, we got to be spending a ton of money and just paper products and the trips to camp and mission stuff. And it just, wow. I mean, it just seems like we spend a lot of money around here, Jim. Jim, did you hear what I said? Jim said, yeah, Bob, I heard you. He said, you know, when we had a son, the day he was born, he started costing us money. I mean, the doctor and the hospital, and, well, there was formula and diapers, and you know, then as he grew, he needed new shoes, he needed new clothes, and as he grew up, he wanted to be in Cub Scouts, and that cost money, and he wanted to be in Boy Scouts, and that cost money, and he wanted to play Little League, and that cost money, and you know, then he wanted to go on trips, and that cost money, and then one day he turned 16, he wanted a car, and that really cost us money. He said then as he grew older, he wanted to go to college, and of course he had to go to a university, and that cost us a lot of money. And he said, you know, we were in the third year of his college, and he was on his way home on a Saturday night, and he said, you know, he was in a car accident, and he was killed. He said, Bob, you know, since the day of his funeral, it hadn't cost us another dime. And Bob said, well, Jim, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. He said, no. He said, Bob, what I'm telling you is, I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm glad I'm a part of a church that's alive. I'm glad I'm a part of a church that costs money because it means it's alive. And aren't you glad to be a part of a church that's alive? I told you about the story of the plane in Louisville, summer of 2006. The fall of 2006, October, my wife and I and my executive pastor and his wife had gone to Liberty University in Lynchburg, Virginia for a conference. In fact, it was the last conference that Jerry Falwell was at before he died. And we had driven back to Richmond, Virginia, and we were going to fly back to Dallas, and my wife and I had been upgraded to first class. And so our friends had already eaten lunch, and we were going to eat on the plane, and we were sitting there. It was about 10 minutes before the plane left, and 2 soldiers walked into the concourse. I said, hey, let's give them our tickets. Now, my wife's a very godly woman. And I love her dearly. But she said, and what am I supposed to eat? And I just jokingly said, well, get a cookie. And that didn't go over very well. And I walked over to the counter. I said, ma'am, I said, my name's Mr. Cameron. I said, here's our tickets for my wife and I. She goes, yes, sir. What can I help you with? I said, well, my wife and I would love to give our seats to those 2 soldiers over there. And she goes, sir, this is a full flight. We're getting ready to board. We can't do it. No. I said, well, ma'am, all I want to do is just give our seats to those 2 soldiers. Sir, I can't. Next. Then more people came up, and I thought, what? So I got in the back of the line, and I made my way back up. And when I got there, and I said, ma'am, listen, I'm not trying to cause you trouble. Sir, we can't do that. I said, ma'am, I don't want to cause a problem. I just want to give our seats to these people over there. And she goes, sir, we can't do it. Well, thank you. So I walked back over to where my friends were and my wife was, and I sat down, and the only one of the 4 of us that appeared to be happy was my wife. And because she wanted to eat. And so we're sitting there, and I said, they won't let me do it. And Mel said, well, why don't you do it like those people did this summer? Just wait till the plane leaves. They can't stop you. Just get up. And I said, all right. But I'm not the kind of guy that just sits there. And I saw that line get down, so I walked back over there and I go, ma'am, really, I'm not trying to cause trouble. I said, there's got to be, we'll take their seats. It doesn't have to be a problem. And a supervisor overheard us, and she came over and she goes, is there a problem? I go, no, ma'am, there's not a problem. So all we're trying to do is we want to give our first class seats to those 2 soldiers over there to thank them for what they're doing for our country. I go, I don't know them. I don't know where they're going. I don't know what they're doing. But I said, listen, we owe them. I said, every one of us do for what they're doing. I just want to give them a seat. That's all we want to do. And the lady says, we can't do that. And the supervisor says, well, yes, we can. She goes, in fact, don't we still have 2 bulkhead seats available you can give to Mr. and Mrs. Cameron? And the lady goes, well, yeah. And she goes, well, and the supervisor got in there, and she gave us 2 bulkhead seats and gave me the 2 first-class seats. I said, no, I don't even want them to know I'm giving them. She goes, no, I think you should take them to them. So I waited, and one of them was looking out the window crying, and the other was on the phone facing a wall crying. So I waited until the one lady got off the phone, and I said, I'm not trying to be weird or anything, but I just wanted to give you, my wife and I wanted to give you our first-class seats to thank you for what you're doing for our country. We don't know where you're going or what you're doing, but we just appreciate it. And they said, and I don't know if they teach this in the military, but they said, no, really, we're fine. What? And anyway, so I gave them the tickets, and I started to walk away, and one of the ladies grabbed my jacket. She goes, how could we ever repay you? I go, no. You don't understand. You don't need to repay us. Well, we have to. There's got to be something we can do. And I said, listen, here's all you do. Someday on down the road, when you can do something generous like this for somebody else, just do it and we'll call it even. They agreed. Well, we got on the plane got up in the air, levels off about 31,000 feet, and the lady with the cart comes up with the drinks and the cookies. And I said, ma'am, I'd like 2 Diet Cokes, and could I get like 4 cookies? And she said, no, sir, I'm not going to be able to do that. Now, I wanted to say to her, ma'am, you don't understand. There's about to be a murder right here in front of the bulkhead. And I was shocked. I said, I can't get a Diet Coke and she goes, no, they're going to do something else. And that didn't make sense to me. And she kept going on back, and I turned to my wife, who is now reading a magazine and does not smile. About that time, the curtain opened from first class, and 2 flight attendants came out with first-class meals. Now, I didn't even know they had little contraptions to go over your seat. And listen, I haven't flown a lot. I'll go over 2 million miles next year, which is not a lot, but it is a lot. And I've never seen anyone served a first-class meal in first class. But they did that day. And they brought this little contraption down, set it on my wife's seat, set mine down, and gave us our napkins and thanked us. And I turned to my wife. And I said, see what happens when we're generous? Every flight attendant on that plane came up and thanked us for what we'd done. When we got off the plane, the pilot and the co-pilot were standing outside the door and thanked us by name. Not Mr. and Mrs. Cameron, but Barry and Janice. The flight attendants told us, all of them on that flight, they'd never seen anything like that in their whole flight. We told them, well, we saw it on a flight this summer, back in 2006. The pilots told us the same thing. Well, we went home, and man, we'd been blessed. What a great experience. And a couple days later, I was checking my account online because I had another flight to go on, and I noticed that American, to fly first class with American, you have to have an upgrade. And an upgrade's $30 for every 500 miles. So it was 2 upgrades from Richmond to Dallas-Fort Worth. That's $30, $60 for my wife, and then $30, $60 for me. That's $120. But I noticed when I got home that American had put our upgrades back in my account. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not the smartest guy in the world. But I know this, and I know this for sure. We didn't lose a single thing we gave. We got it all back. Every bit of it, and more. And that's what the Bible says. We don't lose anything when we give. We lose everything when we don't. So I guess that'd make us losers, wouldn't it? Don't be a loser. Be a giver. And when you learn to give the way the Bible says to give, and you're generous, it's contagious.